Hey everyone, Singleton Sean here, and today in Simple Trader, we are going to be creating a view for this asset summary view model that we set up last episode. So we're going to be building a UI for this on the home view, and it's going to show the user's account balance as well as a list of their assets. So the list is going to be something new. We haven't done much with lists in this series, so we are going to be using a list view, and specifically we're going to be using a grid view. So that's going to be a new topic we get to cover in this episode. Okay, here's the home view right now. So I want this asset summary information to go above this major indexes because of course I feel like it is the most important information on this page. So let's go ahead and X out of that, and we're going to go into our controls and let's create a new item here. And it's going to be user control, basically UI component, what we use for all of our UI, and we're going to call this the asset summary. And now that we have this, let's go back into our home view and let's just add this to our home view right now, and then we can stay out of here and just focus on the asset summary. So one thing I am going to get rid of is this text block that just says home, because I feel like it's kind of redundant. The navigation bar will show you're on the home page, so we don't really need that label there in my opinion. So let's go into our controls namespace, which is where we just created that asset summary, and let's put that in the first row. And then we also need to set the data context on this asset summary. So that's going to be a binding. And what is that going to bind to? Well, we're in our home view, and the data context for our home view is the HomeView model. So let's take a look at that. And that has these two view models. So we're putting the major index listing view model as the data context for our major index listing, as you can see right here. So of course for our asset summary, the data context is going to be the asset summary view model, and by doing that, of course, that is going to allow us to bind to the properties on our asset summary view model inside of our asset summary control that is now in our home view. So first things first, I want to have two columns here, and on the first column we're going to put the user's account balance, which we have right here. We can grab that, and then in the right column we're going to show their assets in the list view that I mentioned earlier. So we're going to have two columns, and the first one is going to have a width of star, and the second one is going to have a width of 2 stars. So the second column is going to take up 2/3 of the space, and the first one's only 1/3. Because the second column is going to have the list view, I feel like it's going to need a bit more space. So in the first column, we're going to have a grid, and let me just specify the column. I like to do that. And inside of here, we're going to have 2 rows. Okay, so let's do a row definition. I think we can just roll with auto and star. So the first row will take up as much space as it needs, and the second one will take up all the remaining space. So in the first row, we're just going to have a header, and the text is just going to be cache. So this is going to be the user's account balance, and underneath that, let me specify the row, we are going to actually show the user's account balance. So let's do a text block here, and this one's going to go in the next row, and we got to have some margin. Can't forget that. I probably already forgot some, but we'll do 10 top, so it's going to be spaced away from this header, and I want it to be big because it's the user's account balance, important information. Let's make it big. 48 is a nice number for that. And then we need to actually get that information from our view model in a binding. So we're going to bind the text to this account balance property on our data context, which is the asset summary view model. So let's grab that. And I need to do a string format here because I want it to be formatted like a currency. So I have done that before, I think on the major index card. So I can just grab the string format we got here, and I might as well grab the fallback value as well. So let's go back into here, and we can just paste that in there. And I think I need to close this tag. Okay, there we go. So that should be good for now. Of course, we're going to have to pop this up in the UI and see if it actually looks good eventually. But while we're here, let's start working on that list view. So that's going to go in another grid, but this is going to be the next column over. So inside here, we're going to follow kind of the same format as this other grid in the first column, so let's grab that. So we're taking the rows, we're taking the header, except the only difference is this is going to be the user's assets. And next up, we just have to put in that list view, and that's going to be in the next row, so row 2. And let's do a little bit of margin. So we'll roll with 10, stay consistent with this margin up here, see how that looks. We need to set the item source for this list view. So there's a property here, item source, and that is basically the collection that you want to display in your list view. So let's grab that, and if we look at our asset summary view model, that is the assets. So we can put that in there, and we should be good to go. So I think what I'm actually going to do is run this and just see how it looks by default. I know we're going to need a lot more because we haven't even gotten into the grid view yet, but let's take a look at what is going on. Alright, so here we go on the home view. As you can see, looks like the cache looks okay. I think another thing I need to do is make these headings bigger. So let's go ahead and make those a font size of 18 for both of them. Might want to extract that to like a style for like subheader or something in the future, but for now all we need is the font size, so it's not like it would be a big style, so I'm just going to roll with just putting the font size in there. So we look at that, looks a little bit better, okay? And I think I want to actually align this account balance in the center. So let's take that and let's do horizontal alignment center and vertical alignment center as well. And take a look at that. Okay, that looks good. I like that. And now I think the most glaring issue with this is, look at our list view. All it says is asset view model. And the reason it says that is because our item source is the assets. And if we look at our asset summary view model, the assets is a collection of asset view model. And what it's doing basically is just calling toString, like the toString method, on the asset view model. And if we did that, if we did like asset view model.toString, it would literally just print this. And it just does that by default because we didn't really tell the list view how we want to display our assets. So we need to tell it what to do. And there's many ways you could do this. You could use an item template, but for us, we're going to use a grid view. And the reason we're going to use a grid view is because it automatically aligns your columns, and you can have column headings as well, which I want for this situation. So to set up a grid view, we're going to have ListView.view, and it's going to be a grid view. And this is super straightforward to set up. So now we have our grid view. We can use these grid view columns, and we can set the header to be, the first one I want is symbol. And then I can set the display member binding, and that's going to be a binding to symbol. So where is that binding coming from? Well, if we go to our asset summary view model, look at our asset view model, it's binding to this symbol property right here. And we're going to do the same thing with shares as well. So that's our first column. Let's just copy that and make this shares. And now we're going to bind to shares. And let's take a look at that. There we go. We're seeing the assets displayed. And I think another thing, I want the font size to be a little bit bigger in here as well. Let's go with 14. I think default's 12. So yeah, that looks better. But by default, I really just don't like the default style of all this. I don't like the border, which we can take away by setting that on our list view. So border thickness 0. Okay, that's a little bit better actually. And I don't like this highlighting either because selecting really doesn't mean anything. And believe it or not, this is kind of difficult to get rid of in a list view. So you have to actually override the item container style. So we're going to set a style for a target type of list view item. So that's the type of container in list views, of course. And we have to set the, it's either template or control template. I think it's template. And we have to actually make this all expanded because we're going to put a control template in here. The target type is going to be a list view item. And we got to do a custom template in here. So what I'm going to do is first off make a grid. And inside of there, we're just going to put a grid view representer. And that's just going to present the content that we have already in there. Of course, now it's gone because we're overriding the style, but we have to actually specify the content as well. So we can do that with the template binding to content, and we close that up. Take a look. It might not refresh by default, so we might have to actually restart. But before I do that, I want to have some margin on here as well, so we'll do 10 top and bottom just to space out the elements a little bit. Okay, there we go. So it did just need a refresh. And another thing, it looks like the font is like blue. So let's set the foreground, which you can't actually set on GridView Representer, but there is an attached property that we can set on text block. And we can set that to black, and all text blocks within this GridView Representer will be black, just like that. So that's perfect. And I think that's everything I want to do for the actual items, but these headers are still a little bit weird. So I actually want to override that style as well, and that's going to go in our grid view. So what we need to do is specify grid view column header container style. So of course style is going to target a grid view column header. And similar to what we did with the list view item, we're going to override the control template here so that we can have as much power as we need in styling this, because otherwise we're going to be stuck with a lot of this default stuff like the blue hover. I think these little separators in between, and we don't really want all that. I kind of just want a simple style that flows with the page. So let's set the template for this, and got to put a full value in here so we can specify this control template and the target type grid view column header. And what I want to do here is do a border first, and the reason I'm doing border is because I want a bottom border underneath the headers, and that is going to have a brush of just gray. I think that's what we use for like all of our borders, so we use that for this as well. So I want to be consistent with that. Might want to put that into a style eventually. Anyways, border thickness, we want that to just be on the bottom, so it's going to be a little underline under the header. I think that'll look nice, and we'll throw some padding on here as well, just 5 top and bottom, just to space out the elements a little bit. White space is always good. And then inside this border, we're simply going to have a text block, and the text is going to be a template binding to the content. And that content is going to be basically this header that we put in right here. So we put symbol in, that gets set as the content, and we're going to display that in this text block. So let's take a look at that, and same thing as before, we're going to have to actually restart to see those changes. That's kind of the annoying thing with working with grid views, I've noticed, is sometimes it doesn't play too nice with the live reload. But anyways, there we go. We got our headers in there, and they look pretty simple, but there's no spacing between them, and obviously that's not okay. So what I'm going to do is just throw some spacing at the end of this padding. So on the right, we'll go about 25 to the right. And of course, I think we're going to have to restart just to see all that. There we go. That looks okay. Why don't we just bump it up to 50 just to be cool. Of course, I'd have to restart to show that, but we'll see more next time we boot up the app. And of course, there's more you could do with grid views. If you actually open this up, you can have a custom cell template. So you could put anything basically inside the column for the cell template instead of just using this display member binding, which will just show a text block with whatever you're binding to. Maybe if you want to show an image, you could use that cell template. You can also specify a custom header as well, rather than just having this text header. But that's more than what we need right now. I'm feeling pretty good about the grid view, so we'll leave it at that. Now, one thing I was thinking of is on our asset summary view model, we're showing the assets. And say a user has like a lot of assets, it's going to show all of them. And really, I think if you want to see all of your assets, you should go to the portfolio page to do that. So I'm thinking I actually want this to be the top assets. So let's rename all of this. We're going to make this top assets. And instead of taking all of the assets, I'm actually only going to take 3 of them. And the 3 that we're going to take is going to be the top 3. So before we take 3, we are going to order by descending based on the amount of shares. And now that we changed all that, we need to update that in our asset summary. So this now binds to top assets, and we should make this top assets as the header as well. So that cleans that up a little bit. Now another thing we need to do is clean up this home view because the asset summary just doesn't flow nicely with the major index listing, and the margin is like all over the place. So as you can see, the biggest problem is this is like centered and this is just expanding. And first thing I'm going to do is not make this center. So let's get rid of that. And that's already looking better because everything is kind of like aligned. But now we have no margin over here. So we can put some margin on this root grid right here. So let's go with 20. And that looks better. And then another problem we have is I want these to be lined up with the header. And that's going to be in our major index listing view. So let's go into that. I'm going to do some margin magic here, okay? So first off, I want it to be 0 to the left. And we're going to keep 0 up and down as well. But then I want to do 5 to the right, okay? And now for our middle one, I want to do 5 to the left and right. And then for our last one, I want to do 5 to the right and then 0 all the way around. And actually, not 5. I want this to be 10. So let me explain this. See, grids are a little bit weird in WPF, and the margin gets accounted into the width. So if this one had too much margin, so if it had more than 10 combined, then the size wouldn't actually be equal to the other cards, even though we're using star width, because it would subtract more margin and it counts that margin into the width. So we're doing it this way so that they all have a total of 10 margin and they will all be equal widths. And now we also made sure that this lined up with the header as well. So that's kind of like an annoying thing. I know other XAML type of languages, like Xamarin I think has it. They have some properties where you can just set like a spacing here, and it'll just like automatically space out the elements within the panel, so you don't have to do weird things like that. But they don't have that in WPF, unfortunately, so you gotta make do with what you got. And of course in like HTML, CSS, you have Flexbox, so you can do all kinds of powerful things. Anyways, that cleans that up, and we also have a problem with our cards here. So one thing we're doing, I saw this earlier, is we're horizontally aligning right for this, and this is the header. This is that changes, and we don't want that to be horizontally aligned right. I think what I actually wanted was this to go on the value for the price, but I got it mixed up for some reason. And now if we look at that, that looks a lot better because all of these kind of like labels, not headers, labels, they're aligned left, and then the values are aligned right and all in line. So that looks good. That's a nice fix. And this is looking better already, but one thing, whenever you go full size, it just takes up way too much space. So what I'm going to do on the home view is just set a max width of 1000. So it's kind of like containing it within that, and now if we go full screen, it keeps it in the center of the screen and it doesn't take up too much unnecessary space. So that looks pretty good. I'm liking that. And now that we did that, we should also apply that to our navigation bar as well, so that the navigation bar is lined up with all of this. So let's go into our navigation bar. And one thing I also want to point out, I didn't see this, but I noticed our navigation bar wasn't working. So after we log in, it like doesn't have the correct radio button checked, which is like the nav button. And the reason is we have this binding expression error down here. So this was like kind of sneaking up here. I didn't see it because it's like way up here in the debug log. But it's because the navigator property no longer on our main view model. So if we go to our main view model, we don't have the navigator anymore. And what we're looking for is the current view model, and that's just simply right on our main view model. So we don't need to use the navigator and dig into that anymore. We can just specify current view model like this. And now it'll correctly select the navigation bar when we start up. So now we need to set up that max width, and there's a little bit of a problem here. So it's not going to be as simple as you might think. Anyways, I'm logging in, by the way, and now it correctly selects this on startup, so that's good. But anyways, it's not as simple for the navigation bar as just setting max width to 1000, because if we do that, looks good right now, but if we go full screen, it doesn't keep the color out here. So what we need to do is not put it up here, and we're gonna have to actually put it on each piece of content. So what we need to do is create a grid here, and this grid is gonna have the background. Okay, so let's put that there, and of course now this is gonna be grid 0. This is now gonna go inside here, and now we can set that max width on our text block instead. So we're gonna set that to 1000. And now, as you can see, the background color isn't going to be influenced by that max width. So let's look at that. Go full screen. And there we go. We have our text in line with all of our content, and the background's still expanding. So now we just got to do that with the navigation bar as well. So let's wrap this with a grid. Surround with the grid. And let's move that up here. We can move all of this. And now inside of here, we're going to set the max width to 1000, and same thing as before, not going to be influencing the background. So now, there we go, everything is lined up. So the UI is actually looking a little bit nicer. I'm pretty happy about that. Now there's a few more things I want to clean up. I also want to set some minimums on our window. So I want the min width to be 600 and min height to be 400. And then one other problem I have, I didn't go over this, but this is like a, I guess like a nice little tip for WPF. Let's go to our asset view model, and as you can see, this doesn't implement or extend our view model base. And of course, our view model base implements iNotifyPropertyChanged, and we don't really need to because these properties never change. Except there is an issue. We bind to these properties, and if you bind to a property on a class that doesn't implement iNotifyPropertyChanged, you could run into memory leaks because the UI will hold strong references to these properties, and then it won't know how to release from those bindings and allow this asset view model to get destroyed. So we are going to inherit from view model base just so that we don't run into memory leaks in the future, which is pretty important because asset view model, we could have a lot of asset view models. So we definitely need to make sure that these get cleaned up and destroyed. So that's a good thing to watch out for. Anyways, I added more money to my account, so I'm going to go buy more of this PLNT, which is Planet Fitness. I'm going to buy 5 of those, and we're going to watch this automatically update that home view. So let's buy 5 of those. We get success. We added that pop-up. Still going to do messaging. I think that's going to be coming up very soon. But anyways, we got 5 more of those. Now if we go back to home, that is now the top asset we have. So this is all working great. Oh, our cache also went down as well. So everything's responsive. And that is actually where we're going to wrap up this episode. So the home view, looking a lot better. Took care of some general improvements just throughout the application. And I think, like I just said, next episode we're going to look into improving messaging throughout the application. So rather than just throwing up message boxes everywhere, we're going to actually display them a little bit more elegantly. Anyways, if you have any questions, criticisms, or concerns, be sure to leave them below in the comment section. But other than that, thank you for watching, and be sure to leave a like or subscribe for more.